My name is Michael Bennett. I'm 46 years old, and just a few months ago I learned that silence is the most lethal weapon a man can possess. While you're listening to this, imagine for a moment the feeling of sitting on a private balcony, the sound of the ocean in the background, knowing that in the adjoining room the woman you shared 15 years of your life with is giving herself to another man in a bed you personally paid for. I didn't scream. I didn't kick down the connecting door. I simply poured myself a glass of whiskey, felt the salty breeze on my face, and started the video recording that would destroy their lives forever. She believed I was on a business trip 3,000 miles away, but the truth was that I was right there, just on the other side of a thin wooden wall, listening as they planned a future that no longer belonged to them. You see, my wife wasn't just cheating on me. She planned a luxury vacation with her lover using our shared savings account, convinced that I was either too stupid or too busy to notice the trail of crumbs she left behind. But she made one fatal mistake. She forgot that I'm a forensic accountant. My job is to find what others try to hide. I booked the cabin next door not out of spite, but out of strategy. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. For nearly 2 decades, my life was an exercise in precision. My name is synonymous with order. As a forensic accountant, I make a living dissecting other people's financial chaos, finding discrepancies in spreadsheets that look flawless at first glance. I applied that same mindset to my marriage with Elena. She was always the color in my gray world. A vibrant woman, 10 years younger than me, working in real estate, with an innate ability to light up any room the moment she walked in. I admired her. I respected her. I believed we were the perfect team, my stability and her energy. We lived in what many would call the American dream, a beautiful house, a perfectly kept yard, and a routine that to me meant peace. Ours wasn't the kind of relationship you see in movies, full of constant fights, quite the opposite. The silence in our house was comfortable, or so I thought. I woke up at 5 every morning, made coffee, left her a note on the kitchen counter, and went to work. I came home at 6 in the evening, we had dinner together, and talked about our days. She told me about the houses she had shown, and I listened, sometimes drifting off into the details, but always present. I was never a man of grand romantic gestures, but I made sure she never lacked anything. Bills were paid on time, savings kept growing, and our annual vacations were always first class. I felt like I was giving her the world, or at least the world I knew how to build, but the balance began to shift, almost imperceptibly. Small cracks formed on the surface. Elena changed her workout routine. Gym sessions that used to last an hour suddenly stretched to 3. She started buying clothes that didn't match her usual style, more revealing, more expensive. When I asked about it, she simply smiled and said she wanted to feel young. And in my blind trust, or maybe my naivete, I agreed. "You deserve it," I told her, while she studied herself in the mirror with an expression I now recognize as anticipation, but at the time I dismissed as vanity. The emotional atmosphere at home shifted from warm to strictly functional. Elena was physically present, but her eyes were always somewhere else. Her answers became short, mechanical. Physical contact, once natural, turned choreographed, almost forced. I blamed work stress or the midlife crisis I assumed was creeping up on her. I never suspected that the emptiness I felt on the couch at night while she locked herself in her office with her phone was being filled by someone else. I became that man others look at with pity without him realizing it. I kept working 12-hour days to sustain a lifestyle she was already sharing, mentally, with another man. I took pride in my stability, in my ability to provide. I told myself this rough patch was just a phase, something time and patience would fix. But in my profession, when the numbers don't add up, it's because someone is stealing. And in my personal life, the hours didn't add up, the expenses made no sense, and affection had evaporated like water in the desert. One day, while reviewing our joint accounts for tax filing, I noticed something unusual. A $6,000 charge with a luxury cruise line. It wasn't a booking for us. The date matched a supposed sales conference Elena claimed she needed to attend in another city. At first, my brain searched for excuses. Maybe it was a surprise gift for my birthday. Maybe it was a bank error. But my instinct, the same instinct that has helped put corporate fraudsters behind bars, told me to dig deeper. I accessed our shared household email, the one we used for bills. There it was. The confirmation. It wasn't a cabin, it was a suite. And the name of the second passenger wasn't mine. It belonged to a man named Gabriel, a name I had heard mentioned a few times as one of the contractors she worked with. In that moment, the world as I knew it ceased to exist. A glacial chill ran down my spine, but I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just sat there, staring at the screen, watching pixels expose the destruction of the last 15 years of my life. She wasn't just leaving with another man. She was planning to do it using the money I had saved through years of discipline, while I stayed home like a fool waiting for her return. That was the moment Michael Bennett, the husband, died, and Michael Bennett, the forensic accountant, took full control of the situation. The confirmation of that booking was the first blow, but what followed was a slow, painful dissection of my own humiliation. I didn't confront Elena right away. My training has taught me that striking first only gives you an advantage if the strike is final. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own home. I watched. I analyzed every one of her movements with a coldness that even frightened me. I watched her have dinner across from me, complaining about how exhausting work had been, while I knew that earlier that same afternoon she had met Gabriel at a motel on the outskirts of town. I watched her smile at her phone under the table, and I just kept chewing, keeping my voice calm, asking if she wanted more wine. The betrayal wasn't only physical, it was a systematic demolition of our dignity. I discovered that Eleanor hadn't just booked the cruise. She had been diverting small amounts of money from our savings account for months, $200 here, $300 there, disguised as beauty treatments or clothing expenses. She was financing his life. Gabriel was younger, a contractor with gambling debts and an easy smile. Someone who clearly gave Elena the excitement my structured life no longer did. But the most painful part wasn't the money. It was finding a hidden file on her computer with the detailed itinerary of the trip. They had planned every dinner, every excursion, even chosen the type of champagne they wanted, waiting in the suite upon arrival. She had written notes in the margins. Our first real sunrise, far away from the boring routine. The boring routine was me. One night, while she thought I was asleep, I heard her talking on the phone out on the balcony. Her voice carried a tone I hadn't heard in years, alive, playful, with an almost teenage urgency. "It's almost time," she whispered. "He suspects nothing. He thinks I'm going to the convention. He's so predictable it hurts." Hearing those words felt like a cold blade sliding into my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the contempt. To her, my loyalty was a weakness. My predictability, which I considered a virtue of a solid man, was something to mock. I lay still in the bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening as she came back into the room and slipped under the sheets, careful not to touch me. The scent of her perfume, once comforting, now turned my stomach. I felt a muted rage, a pressure building in my temples, threatening to explode. But I denied her the satisfaction of a scene. A man who yells is a man who's lost control, and I was about to take total control. The day of the supposed convention arrived. I helped her carry her suitcases down to the car. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, a mechanical gesture devoid of any trace of guilt. "I'll miss you, Michael." "Try not to work too much while I'm gone," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. I nodded, keeping my hands in my pockets so she wouldn't see my knuckles white from clenching my fists. "Have a productive trip, Elena." "I promise I'll be very busy too," I replied. She closed the car door and drove away, convinced she was leaving behind a dull, manageable husband. The moment her car disappeared at the end of the street, I went back inside the house. The silence was deafening. I went into her office and found the documents she thought she had erased. I found the photos they sent each other. The plans to ask me for a divorce right after the cruise, once she was sure I had paid the final installment of her new freedom. I had been erased from my own future, turned into the sponsor of my own replacement. I sat in her chair in the very space she used to conspire against me and made a decision. I wasn't going to ask her to leave. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let the weight of her own actions crush her. That afternoon, I packed a single small suitcase. I didn't need much, just my laptop, my recording equipment, and the reservation I had made myself just hours after discovering hers. The cruise line's system showed cabin 704 occupied by Mrs. Elena and guest. I booked 706. A thin wooden wall and a shared balcony separated by nothing more than a simple lattice would be all that stood between us. I locked the door of our house behind me, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. The betrayal was complete, but the journey was only just beginning. My plan wasn't born out of blind hatred, but from the same methodology I used to track diverted funds: tracing, evidence, and execution. I didn't hire a hitman or some shady private investigator. I called my old friend and attorney Robert Collins, a man who understands that in a divorce, the winner isn't the one who's right, but the one who has the documents. We met in a windowless office, far from any familiar eyes. I placed the folder on the table. There was no need for many words. Robert reviewed the evidence of the money siphoned from our joint account and the cruise itinerary. He asked me only one question: "What do you want to achieve with this?" My answer was short. I want her to feel the same cold I felt. Robert handled the legal side. We prepared a divorce filing based on adultery and financial fraud, but we didn't submit it right away. Surprise was my most valuable asset. Meanwhile, I focused on the technical details. I knew I needed more than testimony. I bought 3 tiny, high-resolution cameras capable of recording in low light. In the nights leading up to the trip, I studied the ship's layout, the deck's restaurant schedules, and especially the cabin configuration. Cabins 704 and 706 shared a divider panel on the balcony that, according to traveler forums, could be opened when families traveled together. That was all I needed. On embarkation day, I arrived at the port 3 hours before they did. I wore a cap, dark glasses, and a light jacket, moving like a shadow among excited tourists. When I stepped onto the ship, I felt a strange calm. Not the adrenaline of a criminal, but the satisfaction of an engineer watching his bridge fit perfectly into its supports. I settled into cabin 706. It was luxurious, far too much for someone who was there simply to observe a disaster. I set out my equipment and waited. At 4 in the afternoon, I heard the magnetic card unlock the door next door. My senses sharpened. I heard their laughter. Elena's laugh, once my favorite sound, now scraped against my ears like sandpaper. I heard Gabriel's voice, deep and smug. "Finally alone," he said. "You have no idea how hard it was to convince my idiot husband that this conference was essential," she replied. Hearing her call me an idiot while I was less than 6 feet away, separated only by a wall, didn't hurt the way I expected. It gave me absolute clarity. She was no longer my wife. She was a target. I waited until they went out to dinner. I knew they'd head to the main restaurant to celebrate the start of their affair. The moment I heard the door to 704 close, I stepped onto my balcony. Using a multi-tool, I manipulated the latch on the divider panel. It took less than 2 minutes. I entered their suite. Her perfume filled the air, mixed with the cheap scent of men's cologne. I saw their open suitcases, the lingerie she claimed she no longer liked, laid out on the bed. With steady, gloved hands, I installed the cameras, one aimed at the bed from the bookshelf, another in the living area, concealed behind a decorative piece from the cruise line. I returned to my cabin and closed the panel. I sat in front of my laptop and opened the monitoring software. The images were crystal clear. Seeing the empty room waiting for them gave me a sense of power I had never experienced before. This wasn't about money, it was about control. She believed she was living a dream of freedom, unaware that every breath and every touch she would give that man was being encoded into data and stored on a remote server my attorney could access in real time. I didn't sleep that night. I heard them return. I heard the pop of the champagne. I heard the promises they made, plans to use my retirement money to start a business together once she had cleaned my accounts in the divorce. Gabriel bragged about how he'd shake my hand when he saw me, pretending to be nothing more than a colleague. Patience was my greatest ally. I could have stepped in then and ended it, but the climax I wanted required them to reach the peak of their arrogance before letting them fall into the abyss. The next morning, while they had breakfast in bed, I was sending the first clips to Robert. He was already drafting notices to the bank and to Elena's employer, informing them of the use of company resources for personal purposes, something I had also uncovered in my investigation. The net was tightening. I was there at the center of the storm, maintaining an icy calm as the ship cut through the waves, moving farther from shore and closer to the moment of truth. The third day of the cruise was the one I chose. The sun shone with ironic intensity over the deep blue of the Caribbean. According to the itinerary Elena had marked with such excitement, that night would be the captain's gala dinner, the moment when passengers dressed in their finest, eager to be seen and admired. I knew Elena would wear a red dress she had bought months earlier, claiming it was for a charity gala I couldn't attend because of work. I prepared with the same level of precision. I put on a dark suit, shaved carefully, and waited until the hallway was empty. Through the cameras I watched them leave. She looked radiant, holding Gabriel's arm as he walked with that unbearable confidence of someone who believes he owns what doesn't belong to him. The moment they turned the corner toward the elevators, I stepped out of cabin 706. I didn't go to the main dining room. I headed to the ship's business center, where I had previously rented exclusive use of one of the high-definition screens for a private presentation. But my real move was technological. Using a small device Robert had obtained for me, I had gained access to the ship's internal video broadcast network, posing as a maintenance technician during a brief distraction of the crew on the first day. I returned to Deck 7 and positioned myself at the bar directly facing the restaurant entrance. I saw them seated at a central table, surrounded by other couples laughing and toasting. Elena held a crystal glass, laughing at something Gabriel whispered in her ear. It was the perfect image of betrayal. I approached slowly. I didn't hide. I walked straight toward their table with a calm expression that drained the color from Elena's face the instant her eyes met mine. The silence at that table was absolute. Gabriel tried to stand, displaying the fake courage cowards summon when they're exposed. "Michael, what are you doing here?" Elena stammered, her voice shaking as she tried to hide her left hand under the table, where she likely wasn't wearing her ring. "I came to enjoy the view, Elena," I replied softly, loud enough only for them. "But I think the view is better on the big screen." At that moment, the plasma screens lining the restaurant walls and common areas, usually showing route maps or scenic photos, flickered. The video that began to play wasn't a landscape. It was footage from cabin 704. The quality was crystal clear. Elena and Gabriel appeared on screen conspiring, talking about how they'd drain my accounts, laughing at my stupidity, sharing moments of intimacy that were now public property. There was no need to shout. The restaurant's chatter stopped dead. Hundreds of people turned to watch the video, then looked back at the couple seated at the central table. Elena's humiliation was total. Her cheeks shifted from pale to deep red as she tried to cover her face. Gabriel, the great conqueror, dropped his gaze, unable to withstand the pressure of hundreds of judging eyes. I felt no pity. I felt the satisfaction of a job well executed. I pulled a thick envelope from my inner pocket and placed it on the table, right beside her champagne glass. "These are the divorce papers, Elena, and a legal notice for fraud. Robert has already frozen the joint accounts. The money you're using to pay for this dinner no longer exists. The bank cancelled your cards 10 minutes ago for suspicious activity." She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her eyes filled with tears, not of regret, but of rage from being caught. "You can't do this to me," she managed to whisper. "I already did," I replied. "By the way, cabin 704 has been cancelled for insufficient funds. You'll have to figure out how to finish the trip. Maybe Gabriel can use that smile of his to convince the captain to let you sleep on deck." I turned and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back. I heard the eruption of murmurs and mocking laughter from other passengers, now pointing at the couple. When I reached the upper deck, I pulled out my phone and saw Robert's message. "All set. The filing is in, and her employer has received the forensic report. She's finished." I stood there, watching the trail of white foam the ship left in the dark sea. Revenge wasn't a fire that burned. It was ice that solidified my new reality. The man who boarded that ship was a betrayed husband, The man who would leave it would be free, owner of every dollar and every minute of his future. Justice isn't something you wait for fate to deliver. It's something you design yourself, with patience, cold precision, and a well-placed camera. The return trip was the quietest of my life, and also the most satisfying. As the ship docked, I watched from a distance as Elena and Gabriel tried to avoid the stares of passengers, who still recognized them from the video on the screens. She wore the same clothes from the first day, her hair disheveled and her eyes swollen. Gabriel walked a few steps behind her, carrying the suitcases, with no trace left of that conqueror's charm. The reality waiting for them on solid ground was far worse than public humiliation at sea. When I got home, the first thing I did was change the locks, not out of fear but out of principle. My attorney Robert did impeccable work. Elena tried to fight back, claiming invasion of privacy, but in the courtroom, the money trail speaks louder than any emotional complaint. Because she had used shared funds to finance her affair and committed irregularities at her own company to cover her absences, her position was indefensible. She lost her job in less than a week. Her friends, the ones who used to celebrate her free spirit, vanished the moment the scandal became public. Gabriel, as expected, didn't stay by her side to pick up the pieces. A man who builds a relationship on the ruins of someone else's marriage rarely has the moral structure to remain when the money runs out and the pressure rises. Through the sheer inertia of my profession, I learned that he returned to his work as an independent contractor, carrying a reputation that now precedes him. People sometimes ask if I regret the coldness with which I acted. The answer is always the same: no. Loyalty is a contract signed with the soul, and when one party chooses to break it with contempt and deceit, they automatically forfeit the other's consideration. I didn't seek justice to save my marriage. I sought justice to save my dignity. Today, my house is back in order. The silence is no longer a space filled with secrets, but a refuge of peace. I've learned that a man is not measured by what is done to him, but by how he responds to it. I could have become a victim, crying in corners and asking myself what I did wrong. Instead, I used the tools life gave me to balance the scales. Life isn't a movie with happy endings where everyone forgives each other. Real life is an accounting of debts, and Eleanor's balance finally hit zero. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect what it's owed. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the bell so you don't miss the next stories.